This is 4358 Ross Crescent, a home that's currently going through the rezoning process in the district of West Vancouver. The home was being proposed is going to consume almost the entire lot, and due to upcoming, although not current, British Columbia regulations, we're going to be raising the home by 11 feet compared to the next door neighbours, with retaining walls on either side of the property. This white post, you can see, that's the height of where, so it's going to go from where the basement currently is, or the main floor of the house currently is, all the way up to the top of this white post. This is the house that's going to consume basically the entire property, and the entire lot is going to be raised by this 11 feet with some slight tapering at the front yard and also in the backyard, down by where the garage is. And as you can tell, this is, especially with this picture, it's completely unacceptable to all the neighbours around.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and for the record, I am one of Rob Heffel's friends. And I do want him to build his house. My name is Cam Curry, and my house is at 4444 Ross Crescent. My waterfront home is 10 lots west of the proposed variance lot, seeking a 5.8 meter geodetic. I have lived at this location since the year 2000. In 2012, I bought my neighbor's lot, combined the two, and spent 3.5 years building my new home at a 3.7 meter geodetic grade. Having lived there for years, I knew I needed to fortify my new home from king tides, heavy rains, and drainage risk from Willow Creek above. On the ocean side, I installed extensive lawn drainage and tiered my patio 2 steps up above the lawn. My patio is comprised of floating pavers with extensive drainage underneath. This drainage has pumps which would shoot the water out into the ocean, but they have never been used, of course. Having seen Willow Creek overflow and witnessed the water table saturated on the street side, I put a series of drain lines that captured any water and shoots it down into the ocean. Because of my extensive engineering in both flood events in the past 3 years, one from Willow Creek and the other from a king tide, storm surge, and elevated water tables, my house was unaffected. Now, this 5.8 meter geodetic proposal completely changes the safety of my home. If approved, the building lot east of me, which would adopt the precedent-setting case of 5.8 meters, it would actually have a significant impact on my home. Let me give you a visual of what that would mean. Unfortunately, I didn't know we had this, but their main floor would be 7 feet higher than my main floor, a foot higher than my fence, which I built for safety and privacy. They would then build a fence so that my living and dining rooms would look at a 12 to 14 foot wall of fence. This too would inevitably happen with the lot to the west of me. And just for the record, the house that Mr. Lansky showed that was flooded, that's the house to the west of me. My house is at 3.7 meter geodetic. That house is built 5 feet below mine. So that house is at about 2 meter geodetic. It was built improperly, and that's why it flooded. Inevitably, that house would be torn down, and the house would be built there at the new 5.8 meter geodetic, which would box me in on either side. More importantly, I would sit 7 feet below both of my neighbors' homes. All this time, I fortified my home from the ocean and Willow Creek, but never did I ever think that I have to protect myself from my neighbors. With the king tide, heavy rain, and saturated water tables, where is the water going to flow? To the lowest point, of course. Rather than being absorbed and released out to the, I'm going to take 30 more seconds like everyone else did.
Well, I think that's my decision, but I'll give you a few seconds to wrap up.
My neighbor's water would be dumped and diverted onto my property. Because again, don't forget, Willow Creek has been one of the causes. As good as my system is, I could not absorb such volume and my home would flood. Michelle McGuire already told us that it is illegal to dump or divert water onto a neighboring property. But by adopting this variance, you are, by default, breaking the law. For the safety of our community, I implore you to reject this variance and consider a geodetic level that is in line with the neighborhood. And I also just wanted to say one thing as well. Mr. Bailey talks about this 5.8 meter geodetic, and I really have to think, you have to consider the source of the information. We got a report from NOAA, which is a NASA oceanic organization, and over the last 100 years, the sea level at Point Atkinson has only gone up by 3.8 inches. Okay, so the idea that we're going to have this Armageddon and this fear-mongering that Mr. Bailey is suggesting, I hope you consider that and perhaps consider other sources of information. Thank you.
The province engineers.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Ian Rosier. I've been a resident of West Van for 25 years. I'm a geologist and engineer with a master's degree in coastal protection. I was previously a partner with Golder Associates. In 3 minutes, I believe the application should be rejected. The guidelines and the so-called climate change science reference are seriously flawed. It's presented as a one-off where it's precedent setting. Completely changed the character of West Van waterfront with box-like row housing perched on mounds of hills surrounded by concrete retaining walls. And area property values will be crushed. The burden of proof just hasn't been met. There are so many uncertainties with the data used for this. The prediction used for sea levels are extreme. Rewave effects. The NHC report recommendations rely on empirical simulation techniques, SWAN models, SWOSH models, all theoretical simulations and predictions that absolutely prove nothing. The proposal cites the increased rise of flooding due to climate change and sea level rise. Well, with respect to sea level science and wave science, they are not exact. Far from it. The regional sea level rise estimates for 2100 vary between 0.2 meters and 1 meter, or 3 feet in the extreme case. Wave surge can be managed using low-impact foreshore protection. Point Atkinson records the rate of rise of sea level since 1900 at 1 millimeter per year. That's half an inch in 10 years, 10 centimeters, okay, or 5 inches in 100 years. Less than 15% of the extreme number predicted for our coastline, and significantly less than the district is theorizing. Regardless of the uncertainties of sea level rises, to justify extreme flood construction levels, the district can just go to Plan B, arbitrarily designate the area of floodplain. The flood risk here is not a result of rivers seasonally bursting their low banks unless they're clogged, such as a creek. And it doesn't define a floodplain. Okay, so the issue is not rising sea levels, and it's not river flooding. It's surface runoff and infiltration, the lack of a functioning storm drain system that's adequate to handle it. It's antiquated and needs updating. Floods on Irwin resulted from severe rainstorm events. Surface water flowed onto lots because the storm drain system didn't function. The groundwater became saturated, the water table rose, water flowed into houses, groundwater flowed into basements. It wasn't salt water. Data's been provided to council for this. Under the guidelines, stormwater runoff would not gravity flow into the ocean at high tide times. Surface water would be diverted into adjacent properties. So will groundwater because of the reduction in permeability caused by consolidation from excessive fill. Consider the legal claims citing regulations that actually cause flood damage. Severe rainstorm events associated with the atmospheric low-pressure cells that affect our area as a result of climate change are hard to predict, but can be managed. Surface water can be managed by intercepting runoff and providing emergency pump sump systems, and any rapid rise in groundwater can be managed by installing fit-for-purpose perimeter drainage and pump systems around properties for emergency situations. No need to raise the grades by 5.8 metres. And if there are any questions, there are a couple of councillors that had questions about foreshore protection measures that might be initiated. I can answer those if you want me to, or I can just leave it for another day. Thank you very much.
I'll be putting some others up also, so is it possible to... Okay, that's great. So that, if I put it this way here, there we are. That's very good. Well, good evening. My name's Kelly Lone. I've lived in West Vancouver for 65 years. My wife almost as long. And we live right next door to this house. And we're going to be the ones that are going to be basically slammed, if I could say, by this rezoning and variance application. And we strongly oppose it. Let's start with the accretion. You'll see here that they're proposing to end up jogging 9 feet, jutting into our property line, as opposed to having these property lines being parallel and perpendicular to the ocean. And we have what is a gate that is our access to the ocean. we're now going to be losing that access. And not only that, but we're going to also end up, you see now, this is us here with our current sight lines, and now we're going to end up having this with this height elevation. I mean, what are we talking about here? And they're pushing the house out by adding this outdoor room with a permanent roof structure, all with the idea that they're going to end up having now what will be a higher house by 11 feet. It's something which I'm just surprised that this would even go as far as it has. And not only that, to add injury to the whole aspect of this, they want to have a wider house. These are narrow lots, lots that are now going to be made more narrow because they're putting in a wider house. They don't need a wider house. It's the same, if you will, width of lot that we have. We didn't ask for variances, and they're now going to be closer to us, making what is, we already know, this setback that we currently have to live with isn't enough. We hear ambient noises from both, if I can say, neighbors at this point in time. And then they also want to end up not having a 30-foot garage setback, which is the minimum. They only want to have 3 feet. In the process, take out these trees, 4 old-growth trees, which help protect 2 other trees of the boulevard and also a Douglas fir that's at the back. They don't need this variance. It's not necessary to end up having the normal use and enjoyment of this home by going through this process. There's going to be hardships, and variance is supposed to be for hardships. The hardship is going to be on the neighbors. I think this proposal should be rejected on the basis that they're going to have understanding the neighborhood stakeholders. We're going to work together with our future neighbors and their architects and staff, come up with a more acceptable and neighborly design. And if the rezoning of the accretion is to proceed to public hearing, it should only be on a condition that any landscaping or structures not interfere with the sight lines and our beach access. And only the house should be raised to this FCL, not these outdoor rooms, pools, patios, terraces, garages, covered walkways. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, thank you very much for this evening. My name is Lawrence Rank. I live at 4472 Ross Crescent. We have been living in our home for 15 years now. Sincerely enjoy the community and the character of a beachside environment that we have, and we sincerely wish to keep it. I will make it very quick because speaking at this level, a lot of people have already said what I felt I wanted to say, so I'd be repeating it. But essentially, there has been not sufficient consideration for the character and look, forget the values, the character and look for the location has not been addressed at all. This has been a site-specific individual process. It has not respected the existing character of the neighborhood, nor the neighbors. I think more consultation with the neighbors is essential. There's a lot of expertise within the neighborhood, and the neighborhood has access to professionals as well. So I think the only way to settle this successfully for all concerned is through a collaboration. And the biggest missing ingredient to the collaboration has been the neighbors. So I recommend that council not proceed with this application further until such time as there's been a suitable and proper collaboration between the applicant, the city, and the affected neighbors. Thank you very much.
I'm going to be looking at, from my home, which is already raised substantially from street level. I'm probably the highest home on the street. And we're going to be looking at a massive concrete wall. Now terracing, it's only a 5-foot setback, so you got to get up from 8 to 19 feet. I'm not sure that the terracing is really going to have all that much of an impact. So, as they've laid out. So we're now going to use this artificial platform to determine new home heights. Planning says that the roof of the new structure will be 4.5 feet higher than the neighboring home, which is mine. And that we should be happy because by code it could be 3 feet higher. Well, how much higher will it be the next home be, which is going to be down by Mr. Curry or Mr. Rozier or somewhere else on the street? Essentially, in my view, it's like advocating for construction of a 3-story home in an established character neighborhood. Nobody should be surprised that almost the entire street is opposing this grading level. The report makes no mention or even remotely considers the serious negative impacts to the residences around this location from the concrete retaining walls that the owner will be building. The report notes that the site will be designed so that runoff would not flow onto adjacent properties, but rather flow to the ocean. Quote, this is an amazing statement. How is the runoff going to penetrate 19 feet of concrete and flow into the ocean? It will not. And any rational inspection of the neighborhood would make that clear. Runoff will flow around the concrete hill and try to get to the ocean. The only problem is there are long-established residences on either side of that. The fact is that the demands for the owners to do this is going to divert runoff onto neighboring properties, which, to Mr. Cameron's point, will create all sorts of other legal issues for the community, for the district. On page 3 of the report, it
So
states...
you're out of time, Mr. Angus. Do you want to make a last
sure.
comment?
I'm just saying, we fully support the new owners building at a reasonable height and urge council and the planning department to work diligently in finding a solution that will work for all existing stakeholders and allow the owners to get on with building their home. In short, I think today that the planning department should be asked to, should ask the owners to resubmit their original home plans and make them a part of the discussion as this procedure moves forward. So, thanks for your time.
Maybe everybody should stand up and have a shake. I think we're all suffering from numb bumps. Stretch. Do something. Poor things. Terrible night. I will try and be very quick. My name is Ann Eady. I live at 4347 Irwin Drive, the second lot over from Cypress Creek, which is about 4 properties over from Ross Crescent. I have lived there since I was born in 1947, and my family has had history in the area since the 1920s. This development, proposed development, is not something that should even be covered by a development variance permit. The same thing happened in Irwin. I found my letter, November 2013, for the Zabot property at 4359 Irwin. The property beside them was going to be elevated to an enormous level. It did not go through. I would like to ask Mr. Helinski at this point, because he does design very beautiful, very expensive homes, many of which are in this very unique area of Ross, Irwin, and Evergreen. The beautiful home beside us, the Phelps residence at 4343 Irwin, what would you conservatively say the home is worth? Not the property, the home.
Miss
It's
Eady,
about 10 years old.
yeah, I'm going to call her on that. This is your opportunity to make submissions to council.
No, it was a submission, and what I wanted to ascertain by that is these areas have incredibly significant, a lot of new homes. I don't care what happens to elevation. I can sell, and it will be my neighbors that will suffer. These homes on either side of us are built for probably 20 million. The home on the other side was 43 million. Tried to be sold at. So how can you possibly use a development variance permit which says benefits should be maximizing, enhancing views of the neighborhood buildings and sites, complement a particular streetscape or neighborhood, work with the topography in a site, reducing the need for major site preparation or earthwork, maintain or enhance desirable site features such as natural vegetation, creeks, trees, and rock outcroppings, retain heritage structures, features, and trees, and result in a superior siting with respect to light, access, and privacy. This is the district's own guidelines. Further, you should consider the potential impacts in the community that are inconsistent with neighborhood character, increase the appearance of building bulk from the street or surrounding neighborhood, reduce light access privacy, require extensive site preparation, and include unattractive building elements. I duly believe 5.5 years ago, this issue was raised before council and staff. Here we are 5.5 years later, and nobody has addressed what will happen to some of the most valuable real estate in West Vancouver if this goes forward. Thank you and good night.
Where we're at. But I think this is being
a minute.
rushed. I just found out that apparently we're having an information meeting in 48 hours.
This,
Where was this before?
Mr. Lone, this is one step in the process. This is not a final decision. This is a decision to move this forward. There is still time moving forward.
And I'm concerned that
This isn't the final
the
decision.
15th of July, which I gather is the final decision.
No.
It's not, because that's because
That's
it's
the
being
public
rushed too
hearing.
far. Okay,
That's the public hearing.
thank you.
And enlighten us as to all the steps of this process that will be involved before council has to make a final decision. Perhaps that would be helpful.
And Madam Mayor, there's a public information meeting where the developer and staff will be present to meet with the neighbors and answer questions. On July 15th, there is consideration of the development variance permit. If you choose to approve that, that is the final decision on the development variance permit. It's the public hearing that night for the accretion. Presuming you give approval to close the public hearing, you could give second and third reading that night and then give final adoption the final council meeting. So I believe that's the 22nd of July for the accretion. But the DVP could be approved on July 15th.
DVP on the 15th, the accretion 1 week later, or, yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Resistance, because they knew that this was going to be a problem with the neighbors. And the council at the time, I went on a tour, said, don't worry, we will support you. We will, if you get a coastal engineer, you do what we say, we will support you. We know it's going to be a tough decision. We know the neighbors aren't going to be happy, but we've got to do this. This is climate change. This is, anyway, if people want to deny that, that's fine, but I'm just relying on science. So, and it's my turn to speak, by the way. So they did everything that we've asked them to do, and now they're asking us basically to do what we said we would do, which is support this. If they jump through all these hoops, and now they've done that. So it is an untenable position. What I'm concerned about, and I guess the message that I'd like to send the neighbors home with, the community that's objecting to this, is this may not be you today, but it could be you in a few years. And if these people can't build a house, I think that's going to affect property values. If this is the process that's going to happen, no one's going to want to buy waterfront because they're going to say, well, they followed the guidelines, they got a coastal engineer, and then they still couldn't build a house. And look at it, probably took them 2 or 3 years. I mean, if we go down this process of just kicking it down the road, I think personally, if I was a landowner, I'd be worried more about that actually than the immediate, which is we're trying to deal with it. So I think there is time for talking to the neighbors. There is time for collaboration. There's time for legal advice. There's time for other professional advice. But I'm following Councillor Thompson's lead. We got to move this forward.
I have a different view. I agree with Councillor Thompson. I was going to be supporting her motion, but for me, the point is simple. I did not say to the Heffels or Mr. Helinski that I would support the proposal before if they did X or Y. It was you always have to listen to what the neighbors say. I'm still looking for a compromise in this situation, and the big $64,000 question for me is what our best legal advice is, and if there's ways in which, further to my exchange with Mr. Curry, if there's ways in which we can provide sufficient certainty for the district that we're not exposing ourselves to future liability, then I am more than willing to explore those ways and see if there's through indemnities or sureties or something. But